So next up, we got some more cave discoveries. In this video, man, what scientists just discovered inside the cave terrifies the whole world. All right, so if you're new, you know what to do. Hit that subscribe button, and let's get to it.
One of the craziest phenomena to hit the internet nowadays is cave diving. Not only are people interested in going deep into caves and exploring places that have never been explored before, but the desire to learn about the people doing this is also there. It's much like climbing Mount Everest, but also in the opposite way. Instead of going to the mountain peak where you're out in the open amongst the elements, you're bringing yourself into a world that's dark, dank, cramped, mysterious, and dangerous. It's no surprise
Sounds like death to me at every turn.
that there have been many people who have died exploring caves, but despite that, there have been plenty of discoveries throughout these cave journeys. And today, we're going to give you 20 shocking things ever found in caves. By the end of this list, you may even want to go cave diving yourself. Catacomb to Paris. When you think of Paris, you might think of the Eiffel Tower, great food and culture like nowhere else. And that makes a lot of sense because all of those things are in Paris. They call it the City of Love. But there's also a lot more to Paris than meets the eye. You would probably be surprised by how much goes on in Paris that we don't even know about. There's a lot of history that goes into this place, and some of that history even makes you feel like you're watching an episode of Game of Thrones. But don't worry, this one isn't too spooky, not as much as it is interesting. We travel to an area known as the Catacombs, and unlike we said before, it's not your typical known area of Paris by any stretch of the imagination. The Catacombs of Paris are much like a giant cemetery, just with a lot more history, and a little bit more flair. It's not your everyday cemetery to say the least, and this is because it holds around 6 million people. If you're unfamiliar with how numbers work, those numbers—
I just thought he was just gonna say bones, like 6 million bones. 6 million people. Yes, I would love to go. I would love to go there and check this out. Absolutely.
Numbers are comparable to that of a big city. Those numbers come close to that of New York City in scope. They began to work on this in 1774 to find a place to assist in how many cemeteries were in the city. It was a grand project to pretty much offset how all the dead people were filling the place up. We don't know if that's a grim thing to think about or what, but it's interesting nonetheless. Artifacts of Mammoth Cave. The art of cave diving is a mix of thrills and solving a mystery. That mystery happens to be what's in the cave.
And I would be terrified of getting lost. Like, you know what I mean? I don't see like what we would call in the fire department like taglines or something like leading them back out. I'm pretty sure they have some method of knowing, but for me, that would be one of my biggest fears of like, yo, I'm making sure we do not get turned around.
Humans have a natural curiosity. We all need to figure out what we don't know. We're driven to the darkness even when it may pose danger. Now, for the most part, there are plenty of caves in the world that don't have any major secrets. A lot of caves are just caves, empty caverns with poor lighting and probably bats. But now and then you stumble upon a cave that's like nothing else. You realize that it's home to something that roamed the earth so many years ago that it's even hard to fathom. We're talking about a Mammoth Cave. And what was found in this Mammoth Cave happens to be some really cool artifacts. This all took place when they were performing a pretty extensive renovation. The cave system is located in Kentucky, of all places, and has always been a place where researchers have been looking for pieces that can better explain history. There are plenty of artifacts that were found, but the most breathtaking part about it all is the fact that these artifacts are around 200 years old. We doubt they'll be featured on an antique roadshow, how old and precious these things are, but we're sure that they'll remain in the hands of experts for some years to come. It just goes to show you that you never quite know what you're going to find in caves all around the world. Prehistoric surgery. We here at the channel do think that it's kind of funny that caves can be so versatile. You would think that if you saw one, you'd seen them all, but that's truly not the case, as we are learning with this list. Caves come in all different sorts of shapes and sizes. To assume that one is just like another would be foolish. They're almost like fingerprints. Exploring them could be fun, but they can also be quite dangerous. Now, we feel like we've said that plenty of times. already on this list. So let's bring up another point. Can you imagine having surgery in the cave? How about doing an amputation?
Ooh.
We know that there was a movie based on a true story of a man who had to cut his arm off to get himself out of a terrible bind. He brought the phrase between a rock and a hard place to the forefront. Well, this...
What movie they talking about? As I thought he was going to say ankle, I automatically went to Saw. You see the type of movies I watch, right?
one cave proves that amputations were successful even 31,000 years ago. This all took place in Borneo, and it is coined as one of the first successful amputations on record. It's pretty crazy to think that people actually keep records like this, but there you have it. We now know we're not the first civilization to cut off our limbs like psychopaths. What this also proves is that we had a better knowledge of medicine and how to solve illnesses than was previously thought. It seems like we should start giving our societies of the past more credit than we do. Giant crystals in a cave. One of the most memorable scenes in any Superman movie is when he finally goes to the Fortress of Solitude.
Yeah, I thought I was the only one when I saw this here. These crystals thought about Superman. I thought I was the only one though.
If you're unfamiliar with the Fortress of Solitude, it's pretty much like Superman's hideout. His place where he can relax and get away from the crazies of, well, being Superman. If we're lucky, we all have a place like that, one that we call our safe place, where we can regroup and reconnect with ourselves. Because, after all, the world is a crazy place at times, throwing us off our game and always giving us something unpredictable to deal with. But it wasn't the fact that Superman had that hideout. It was the fact that his hideout was filled with crystals. That's what made it marvelous to look at. Well, this type of cave is not only subject to comic books because there's actually a cave with a giant crystal in it. You can find this marvelous looking cave in Mexico where it really does resemble the Fortress of Solitude. It was a bunch of miners who were looking for something else entirely that came across this incredible discovery. When you look at it, it doesn't even look real. It looks more like something from a Hollywood set. They found this cave almost 300 meters below ground, and the area contained all sorts of different elements. It was a treasure trove that researchers couldn't even make up themselves. One of the researchers who associated with this project actually had been growing crystals since they were 15 years old. We're just surprised that you can actually grow crystals like that. Whenever they're discovered, they're usually in shambles, ruined by time, weather, and sometimes even human intervention. Not this tomb though. This tomb is in pristine condition. And hey, we'd hate to say it, but if we were to be buried anywhere, we wouldn't mind being buried in a place like this. It's nicer than where Marilyn Monroe was buried. Dead Sea Scrolls. We mentioned before that there are some cave divers that might be looking for treasure. Now, the likelihood of finding...
It ain't some, it's a lot of them. And that's what ended up happening. They end up messing up things when others come around and discover things like the caves and different things like we just saw in the previous slide. It's because they done came through and rummaged, stole, did different things and messed up the history that we be trying to discover.
A treasure like the one in the movie National Treasure is probably very low. And when you define the word treasure, the definition changes from person to person. That's why there's that expression, one man's trash is another man's treasure. But that doesn't mean that there aren't objective treasures out there. We're talking about pieces of history that can't be quantified. You'll know when you see it. It's like when they discover the Titanic. There was no amount of money or amount of gold that could quantify a find like that. Well, with this next one on our list, we don't quite have the Titanic, but we have something similar in scope. It's the Dead Sea Scrolls. You may have thought that it was just something out of the Pirates of the Caribbean, but no, these are all too real. What was found here was fragments of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Of course, you'd think that they'd look like a cartoon scroll that Popeye would find. But time has not been nice to this piece. As you can see, the scientist hanging it needs to be super careful not to make them any worse. But still.
Could you imagine being the person having to put that together? I'd have to get that to somebody who liked to put down, like my grandmother, back in the day, she used to do the puzzles, the big ones that are about the size of the table and the little pieces like about that big. Yeah, I'd have to give something like this to her because me, I probably wouldn't have the patience for this.
I would find. But time has not been nice to this piece. As you can see, the scientist hanging it needs to be super careful not to make them any worse. But still, this is one of those once-in-a-lifetime finds. River in cave. We tend to think that cave divers might just not want a thrill and treasures, but they might also imagine themselves stumbling upon a world in and of itself. We as humans crave magic. We have an image that can't be matched. We wish that we could be in the movies that we watch on TV. So, in turn, we drum up all these different types of worlds that we wish we could visit. And maybe cave divers and people who explore caves do so because they want to encounter something that no one else has. Well, this one on our list kind of fits that description, because sometimes you stumble upon something that doesn't make a lick of sense, but looks awe-inspiring at the same time. What we're talking about here is a river in a cave. Of course, it sounds like something out of Alice in Wonderland, but take a look for yourself. When you look at this video, you realize that claustrophobia can't be an issue with these people in this video.
Exactly. I'd be thinking about claustrophobia. I'd be thinking about the cave, all of this pressure from the water. Hopefully this thing don't collapse. And they just jumping in the water all freely, man. People crazy, bro. Some of y'all are just like, there's thrill seekers, but then y'all take it to a whole nother level, man. No.
It's one of those things where if the water had risen just a few feet, those men in the video would have been goners for sure. They're lucky that this wasn't the case, but still, we applaud them for having the courage to do this in the first place. Patal Bhuvaneshwar Cave. Going back to the expression before, one man's trash is another man's treasure. Sometimes that expression applies in a very different way altogether. You don't technically need to find gold or jewels. Sometimes finding a little bit of history can be just as good. And sometimes that history can have a major impact on culture and humanity as a whole. There are just things that can shape us as a society. A lot of those things have to do with religion. When people find a bit of history or a relic that relates to their religion, it can be earth-shattering. And this next cave on our list is no exception. It fits the description perfectly. It's the Patal Bhuvaneshwar Cave, and it is said to belong to the underworld of the gods. This cave in question looks more like a house from the outside, but once you venture inside, you realize just how much history is inside this place. The condition isn't as good as some other historical places we've covered on this list, but still cool to look at nonetheless. The video takes you on a bit of a tour, and you can't help but feel as though you're actually there.
Right.
The cave itself resembles that of the Bat Cave, and we're pretty glad that we're only watching it on video rather than actually being there.
But I was about to say the same thing. It makes you feel like you were right inside of that cave with them. And for me, that's the best place to be. Feeling like I'm inside the cave, not like being in there.
Skull cups in cave.
Skull
Usually
cups.
when we do these lists, we cover a lot more ominous occurrences. Whether they're grim discoveries or stories that have taken place in history that don't make humanity look like the friendliest people. We love to showcase things that people don't know about. We're all about being informative. We're here to enlighten and educate, even if sometimes that education is dark. On this list, we haven't really ventured into that area of the world. We've shown some things that will make you scratch your head, but we've got to cover something that will make you kind of cringe. And we're talking about cringing in a bad way. Because sometimes humanity is just dark. Sometimes there's no way around the darkest parts of our existence. And this story will make you look at us differently, because it's about cannibals. We wish cannibals didn't exist in the world or in history, but they do, and they have. So let's look at this one story where a couple of people were a little hungry. The skulls were found in a place called Go Cave. They are said to belong to cannibals. They also fell victim to cannibals as well. When you see these creepy skulls, you realize that they're not in one piece, they're just fragments. They're not located in the Museum of Natural History, and prove that humanity may be great, but sure does have a dark past. Let us know in the comments what your thoughts on cannibals are. But don't tell us if you are one. We don't really want to know that. Gold findings in a cave. Okay, now that we got the cannibals out of the way, we can now shift our focus to something that's a little bit more fun. We can finally go back to what cave diving is all about. Or at least what it's all about when we think of it. Because, call us crazy, we love it when a treasure kind of looks like a treasure. You know, when instead of finding some sort of relic, you find gold. That's always a feel-good story for us. And so, this time we have a feel-good story to cleanse our palates away from those cannibals that we were just talking about. Because this time we found gold in a cave. You can't get much better than that. Of course.
That's when you immediately got to cut your eye over to the people that you with and be like, all right, can I really trust them? Am I going to make it out of here alive? Are they going to try to do something to me? Like, that's when all the trust goes out the window.
Of course, we won't see a dime of it though. But talking about it should just be fun enough. As you can see in the video, this person was digging and came across this amazing gold ball while flicking away little specks of dirt. It almost looks like one of those jumping balls that you can find in the coin machine at the store. We don't know what this person did with such a find, being that you can see all the gold around it. But hopefully he found a pawn shop. Ice Cave. Some of the craziest stories that we've ever come across on this channel have come in the form of being cold. We're not just talking about frosty snowmen or a few ice trays from the refrigerator. We're talking about instances and things in the world that have been morphed into the incredible simply by being associated with ice. There have been so many times that we have spoken about things like glaciers, Antarctica, and even flowers that resemble icicles. But this time, we take you to a place that's filled with wonder. It'll honestly make you feel like you're in some sort of Christmas world mixed with maybe Batman. That's because we're talking about an ice cave. The crazy thing is that caves are already kind of cold depending on where you are. So we can't imagine what this one feels like. It definitely feels like we're talking about Superman's Fortress of Solitude all over again. This video shows how amazing an ice cave can look. It's downright serene. You can't imagine how cold it must be in such a place, but the person filming this looks rather at ease despite the beautifully flowing icy water from above. This is one of those places that we wouldn't mind going to, unlike the other ones. Olm in Cave. Sometimes it's the animals that are inside these caves that really give them the character that we wouldn't quite expect. Let's face it, caves can be their own world. They're like a subculture in a way, kind of like a skateboard shop. You need to learn the lingo, and if you're an animal, you need to know how to survive. Well, this one Salamander had no problem doing just that, and it's got plenty of people on the internet talking. Because it's a salamander who spent a long time in this one cave. He definitely kept renewing that lease. This is one definitely strange creature to say the least. It has both gills and lungs. Not only that, it can live up to 100 years. So it's no wonder that this thing spends so much time in a cave. We don't mind that it does because look at the coloring of this thing. It doesn't seem like a creature that would belong in our world, but it does. So that's probably the only thing that we can do, and that's accepted. It's going to live longer than us anyway. Serapeum at Sakar.
That's why we need to continue to study it. I think right there is one of our fountains of youth right there. Figuring out how it does it may help us.
By now you probably have the urge to go watch the movie National Treasure or something similar. And we don't blame you for that because we've spoken about treasures a lot on this list. We haven't shown away from all the possibilities that a cave can bring to this world. We absolutely love the mysteries that caves have. As a matter of fact, we think that this list has kind of changed our perspective of those parts of the world. And this one is definitely something that could change the perception of many people. When you first look at it, there's a mysterious aura to it. You don't quite know what you're looking at. Those are often the best mysteries. That's the case with this next one on our list. It looks like a box when you first look at it. But once you get past that, you'll realize that it's not just any ordinary box. There's far more to it than that. You know how we do it at the channel. There's always more than meets the eye. It's a location that looks like it's right out of Game of Thrones. Just looking at this video of this location makes you feel as though you're looking at history through maybe a religious lens. The walls may be an old palace color, but the 20 boxes that are here invoke so much mystery that there are plenty of people who travel to see this location year after year. The video may be a little grainy, but you can definitely see why this one's being talked about. It would make for a great video game level. Buddhist Cave. Of course, here at the channel we can't avoid talking about religion or the figures that have shaped religion in the past. After all, it's been a major part of our world. Society all around it practices its own form of religion. One religion that always comes up seems to be Buddhism. It goes back for decades. Most people find it fascinating how Stoicism plays such a big part in Buddhism. The great Buddha is someone that is on the tips of the tongues of many. Well, this list may be about caves, but that doesn't mean that we can't talk a little about Buddhism, because now we move on to the Buddhist Cave. If you thought you've seen it all in terms of Buddhism, think again. Now, what we're talking about here is not an actual Buddhist, but a statue, a rendering that has people going to see it all the time. It's a tourist attraction with a whole lot of symbolism. Everyone comes to see what is called the Longmen Grottos, and everyone takes their own value from it. Some see it as a poetic sense, while others see this giant statue as a representation of an actual man who lived centuries ago. All we know instead of that, it's bigger than most monuments in the United States. So if you want to go see a behemoth of a statue, go see this one. Paintings found in a cave.
That one right there definitely gotta go on my list for sure, bro. Imagine being there and just being amongst that. You know what I mean? The energy. I'm telling y'all, man, I done got big on energies here lately and stuff, bro. Like, imagine what type of mindset that'll put you in calmness, you know? Yeah, that one's going on the list for sure.
If we've learned anything here at the channel, it's that it's usually not the big things that leave our jaws dropped. 9 times out of 10, it's the subtle things that get us most.
True.
And we think we know why this is. It's the same reason why people get scared of mice or spiders.
I saw that earlier, the hands up there. And I thought about something crazy, like one of the scary movies with the hands just being all on the ceiling.
They may be pretty small, but that doesn't mean that they can't strike the biggest fear in people.
Exactly.
And that's okay, because we like to think that that's just part of life. The circle of life, if you may. So that's why this next one on our list is extra special, because there are no bells or whistles or anything. It's just something that makes you widen your eyes and look a little closer. Because here in Indonesia, we found a cave painting that's around 4,000 years old. Let's just say it's not anything like an NFT. It's called the Cave of Lascaux, and had been discovered by accident by a few boys who were playing back in the day. Little did they know they would stumble upon this piece of artwork within the cave that almost looked like Leonardo da Vinci himself had drawn it. The story goes that these 3 Frenchmen and their dog Robot had been playing around, and the dog jumped into the cave, leaving them in there as he would be chasing a rabbit. And as you can see, this cave is priceless. Passages found in Mammoth Cave. If you remember how we started this list off, you might recall that we spoke about a Mammoth Cave. It was pretty extraordinary to see. This is because anytime history comes alive and proves what we have in our history books, it's a pretty cool day to say the least. There's nothing like a little history to liven you up and get the senses flowing. And if you like that,
And I hate to be this dude, but can you imagine being in here and all of a sudden the ground just starts shaking and you in an earthquake, bro? See, this is what happens with my brain and make me be like, you know what? Never mind. Scratch that. I'm not going to go in there.
nothing like a little history to liven you up and get the senses flowing. And if you liked that story about the Mammoth Cave and found it fascinating, then we have good news for you, because we're not quite done with them. We still have a few to go until we get to number 1, and this one goes back to the Mammoth yet again, because there were 5 passages found in this Mammoth Cave. And it's not the type of Mammoth Cave that you would come to expect. You'll see what we mean. It was an already Mammoth Cave, but a few cave diggers have added some miles to it now, because they have found 5 extra passages. It was 8 miles that had been discovered, and 8 miles in the cave system is no joke. Because of that, the cave has broken a record. That's pretty cool. Maybe down the line they'll find even more of this cave. Until then, congrats on the record breaking. Ramses II artifacts. We have to admit, this list taught us that caves aren't just bat-dwelling homes. They have a lot of history to them. They represent history in a way that we would have never thought of before. They're almost like living, breathing record books. Whether you're finding drawings or signs of cannibalism, if you want to get to know our world, go do some cave diving for a bit. Now, we understand what the big fuss is about. Well, now we move on to another piece of history. This cave has people talking because it takes us back to the time of Ramses. Instead of treasure or anything that we've spoken about yet, this time we're going to move on to the world of artifacts. They're calling it a once-in-a-lifetime discovery, and the artifacts that were found belong to an ancient burial ceremony. This is the first time anyone has laid eyes on them since they were packaged away during the time of Ramses II. That means that these artifacts were untouched until the time of their finding. How many things nowadays can say that they weren't touched for that long? Everything today nowadays has fingerprints all over it, but not these artifacts, which are pretty impressive. Cave pseudoscorpion.
Oh.
Remember before we were telling you about how small things can just be as scary as the big things in life?
Whoa.
For example, everyone kind of knows that elephants are afraid of mice, even though elephants are gigantic. It's those little idiosyncrasies that make our world a very interesting place to live in.
And see, the messed up thing is you won't see it coming. You be laid over like we saw that dude earlier in the cave, laying on his side, crawling or something like that, and it crawl up your pants leg. That's how it gets you.
There's a lot of irony in life, no matter where you look. But sometimes things are just as they seem. Like, if you saw a big cave-dwelling spider, you would probably be a little spooked. Or at least most people would. And guess what? We think that you know where we're going with this one. Because we have a spider living in a cave just for you. If you have arachnophobia, this story might not be your favorite, but we promise it'll be interesting nonetheless. This cave-dwelling spider is just as its name implies. It dwells in caves. There's still more research needed in terms of figuring out just how these spiders live. But if you take a look, they're pretty gruesome in appearance. They're not your typical house spider, that's for sure. They have this ugly reddish-brown coloring that just makes it look as though this thing is filled with poison. Luckily, none of us will be going into this cave anytime soon to encounter one of these scary-looking spiders. We suggest the same for you. Missing soccer teams found in cave. Like we've said over and over again, on this list, caves can be worlds in and of themselves.
I remember this story. They all made it out.
Can't match the atmosphere.
I think it was one person, maybe one of the rescuers, or maybe one of the chaperones that may have not, but for the most part, the majority, if not all but one, made it out.
You can't match the culture of what cave divers live in. Again, it's much like a subculture, of course. No matter how safe and prepared you are when it comes to these caves, things happen, accidents occur. And unfortunately, people go missing. Entire soccer teams actually go missing. That sounds pretty hard to pull off, but caves don't have remorse. They'll take whoever they want, even if you're a great soccer player. So what exactly are we talking about? Well, an entire soccer team had gone missing, but luckily it was found. Let's take a look at the details about this one and maybe we won't make the same mistake. Although it kind of feels like getting lost in a cave is an easy thing to avoid, but maybe not. Let's take a look. It was a Thai youth soccer team that had gone missing for 10 days. The coach was with them. Somehow they found the ability to smile when they were found. It was the Thailand Navy who found them all alive and well. Of course, they needed to go through some evaluations and they probably wouldn't be playing soccer anytime soon. But at least they were found with all their feet. Joseph Henry Loveless. How do we top such a great list? How do we choose number one? We've had so many extraordinary sections throughout this one when it comes to caves that you wouldn't think that we'd be able to top any of them. Well, now we move on to Joseph Henry Loveless. You might be asking yourself just who this is and why we're talking about him. Well, we'll explain right now, because Joseph Henry Loveless was an outlaw. He was what you would call a cowboy back in the day. His name had a lot of notoriety throughout the years. And one thing that stood out about his identity was the fact that no one knew where his body was when he died. Well, that's where this one cave comes into play. We'd hate to end this list on a note talking about dead bodies, but looks like that's exactly where we're going. So don't mind us since we talk about how this man was found. The man's body had been found dismembered in a cave around 40 years ago. It was a cave in Idaho. The man's identity was figured out via genetic genealogy. It was, of course, Joseph who had escaped jail in 1916. The kicker here is that they identified the man that they have no idea who killed him, and have no idea where his skull is. Maybe one day someone will find it, but that's one heck of a tale. At least the wife he had murdered got some justice, as gruesome as that justice was. Needless to say, it's a pretty extraordinary thing to go deep into a cave and start exploring. We have to admit after this list we have a whole new appreciation for the world of caves. They're not just these dank and human places that you want to avoid. Instead, they are pretty fascinating places to observe. They seem to have their own rules and histories. Lucky for us, there are plenty of caves out there in the world that will probably be turning up a lot more information and giving us stories for years and years. Luckily for you, we'll be right here to give them all to you. So, until next time, we beg you, when you get into a cave, be careful, because you never know if there are...
Or just don't go in one, and you can sit back just like us and watch them here on YouTube. I'm telling you, man, it's look, you could tell. Dangerous. Especially if you don't know what you're doing, you're not highly trained. And even if you are highly trained, it's still dangerous, bro. You know what I mean? Leave that stuff to the professionals, man. And I'm thankful, because if I'd had a cave near me when I was like 11, 12 years old, I'd have been all up and through that, man. I was that kid. So yeah, man, y'all be safe. And y'all get at me in the comment section. Let me know what you thought of this video, man. Super crazy. Till next one, I'm gone. Peace.